Hello and welcome to Shampoo and Booze, a podcast about Airbnb and short-term rentals at shampooandbooze.com. This is episode number 56. We are Ryan and Ashley. We are sisters who run Airbnbs and want to help you run yours. Every week we cover topics about the design and operation of short-term rentals. You can send us your questions with an audio file, or you can write us a comment to shampooandbooze@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to cover topics that you care about. We're also available to give design and listing advice for your own personal situation. You can check out our services page at notperf.com to book time with us. Okay, this week we are talking about the differences and the experience of running an Airbnb inside your home or as a detached separate property. So Ashley runs an Airbnb in her apartment, and I run Airbnbs on totally separate properties where I never have to see anybody if I don't want to. So we actually got a great voicemail message this week asking about this exact thing. So let's play that message.
Hi, Ashley and Ryan. This is Tiffany from Indianapolis. I'm so glad you guys are starting this podcast again. This topic is so interesting to me. I don't have an Airbnb at this time, but it's definitely part of my midterm goals and investment I would like to make. So I have like three questions. The first is, Ashley, when you mentioned that you are renting out rooms in your apartment in Boston, do you own the apartments, or were you owning those apartments, or were they apartments that you rented yourself? The second question I have is around target audience. So who are the types of people that would rent a room in somebody's apartment or house in a larger city? Are they business people? Are they just a solo traveler? I'm really curious to understand who those people are. And then my third question is around safety. Having somebody come into your house, whether you're partnered or not, how are individuals vetted from a safety perspective? Have you ever encountered any weird or scary situations, or have any advice around that? And then lastly, I just want to make a comment. I think that the services you guys are going to provide are awesome. I think you're really filling a niche for people like me who want to start something, but they don't want to maybe spend a lot of money, or at least want to have somebody in their corner who can help them identify how to get things, some really nice things, less expensively. So I just am very excited about what you're doing here, and thanks so much.
Okay, so let's answer those questions in order. Number one, do you own the house you're renting the apartment in?
The answer to that is no. Our father actually owns, it's a 3-family building in Boston, and so this is always a tricky one because oftentimes people are renting apartments and they don't have permission from the landlord to Airbnb a room. I also know of other people who do rent Airbnb without telling their landlords. Also, a lot of the Airbnb regulations have changed recently in Boston, and so we were having issues with developers coming and buying up properties and just Airbnb-ing them across the city. And now I think you have to be somewhat owner-occupied to be able to rent. So that's a quick answer to that.
So I do want to just mention New York is like that too. New York City, you're supposed to be owner-occupied. And you can't rent more than, I forget what it is, if it's like 45 days a year. So that is super restrictive and tough for people. I'm sure people skirt those rules all the time, but it was because, people were essentially opening up hotels in the city, but it was a distributed hotel where they're like, I have a bunch of apartments in this building, I own this building, and people who lived in those cities did not like that. But you are essentially owner-occupied. Like, you're renter-occupied. So that's how you do it. You rent your second bedroom as an Airbnb with permission.
Yes, exactly. Right, exactly. So I sort of think of it as owner-occupied that way.
Okay, so second question real quick is who would rent in a shared space? Because one of the beginning, tenets of what Airbnb was created for was for people to essentially sleep on an air mattress on your floor. This is not renting an entire apartment. This is not renting an entire house. That is not why Airbnb started. They started to rent an extra bedroom or an extra couch or whatever.
Right. It was almost like a step up from couch surfing.
Right.
It was like you pay for it. And I guess, there are two parts to this question too, and we'll get into the safety part later. But, what I've found over the years of renting a bedroom out of my apartment is all kinds of people are looking for that situation. And I would say, weirdly, I attract a lot of mother and daughter travelers. I don't know why that's the situation, but I think it's like coming to a new city. Oftentimes they're tourists. Many times they're from Europe. They just want to come like see a cute little button city. And they're like, traveling together, and they want some kind of hosting and direction of where to go and what to do. But they don't want to stay at a hotel, and they don't want an entire apartment. Financially, they can't afford that. So I'm like that kind of in-between place in terms of what I rent for. So anyways, I feel like that's a huge part of my clientele are people traveling together. Couples, I get many couples, people who come down from Montreal, weirdly. People who are coming for a conference. I have a lot of people who come for like Harvard things and, university job searches and stuff like that. Honestly, I feel like a lot of people who are looking, I've had a lot of people who are looking for apartments in the city, and they need somewhere to stay for like 2 straight weeks to look for a place. And so in some ways it's like they want to be in the neighborhood they're looking, and they want like a local kind of perspective on where to look for apartments. And so I've actually had a lot of people like that. And we'll get a little bit more into safety and in terms of like how I sort of pick and choose and how I follow my gut on like whether someone's a good fit or not for the space, because I've definitely come across people who are not.
So I also want to say that what you're saying about people wanting to be in that neighborhood is also why Airbnb got started. Because Boston's a great example. If you want to stay in a hotel, like a high-rise hotel or whatever, it's downtown. Like it's in the business district, it's in the financial district. It's like almost nobody lives there. Like that is not a place where you're like, I'm going to walk my dog and go to the park and like go to my local cafe. Like that is not where the hotels are. So and Boston's tiny too. So you're like 2 miles down the road, 1 mile down the road is your neighborhood where people actually live. And there is a cool coffee shop, and there are dog parks, and there are like cool, thrift stores and what, it's like, this is where the people live. So when we travel, we always want to go to those places because we want to feel like we live there. We want to feel like the locals feel. Like, what does this city feel like to live in? So those are the kinds of, experiences that people from Europe or people from, other cities that might live here want to have. And Airbnb is like perfect for that. So those are the people that are, for your situation in a city where you're sharing an extra bedroom, that's what it really feels like.
Yeah. And Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like to run an Airbnb on a separate property, or do you want to hit that kind of later after we talk about safety issues of renting as a single person?
I can touch on it real quick because I am in a really different, I'm in a rural area. I'm in a place that is known for vacationing. It is like the vacation area for people outside of Washington, D.C. We have a national park. We have a national forest. It's like hiking. We have the river. Like this is like outdoorsy place that people come from all over the country, but mostly like East Coast and DC vacation. So it's really different. Like people are not coming here to be like, we might move here. I mean, some people are like that. We might get a vacation home here or whatever, but it's such a different demographic of guest. It is families. It is people with dogs. It is like people coming together where they live in Virginia Beach and someone else lives in New Jersey and they're getting together like halfway or whatever. It's vacation. So for us, it makes sense to not rent on our property. Like I have an office that's basically a studio apartment on my property right behind my house. And we thought about renting it like that. But we're kind of, number one, our HOA, our housing association does not allow that. So that's something to think about too when you're starting to rent, like, or buy property to rent. Like, is it in an HOA or a lot owners association that actually allows that? Ours does not, which is kind of hilarious because we see places for sale in our neighborhood all the time and we're like, we can't buy it because it can't be a short-term rental, so we're not going to do it. For us, it's all about detached properties. It's about giving people a house or a, in quotes, cabin. We don't really own cabins, but like that people can have a little backyard and a barbecue. And like that is the area I live in. It's like the opposite of where you live and where you rent. So it's very separate from where we live. Like there are times where I never see people. We communicate with them on Airbnb and I might not see them the whole time, which is fine. It's just different. They're not in my space at all. Okay, so the next question that most people have, like we heard on our voicemail, is the safety of renting out your space, especially if you are a female.
And like not partnered, so I live alone. Yeah, I mean, I feel like actually this is the most common question I get. Like, aren't you afraid of like hosting people by yourself? And I have to say, over the years, I've really not encountered situations where I felt unsafe or I felt like I was in a not okay situation. Most of that is also I live in a house full of people. There are apartments downstairs from me, there are people all around me all the time. And of course, like, there's like 911, so there's never been an issue where I'm like, oh, I'm all alone in the woods, it's like, so anyway, so that's one aspect of my situation. The other is, there are things that you can put in place that are, I think, quite simple. So one of them is, for a long time, I did not have instant book, which meant every single time someone booked with me, I actually reviewed that person. So I would like see if they had other reviewers. Also, I would see if they had, anything that felt like a red flag in terms of their, like own profile. Often people are new to Airbnb, so they don't have much on their profile or they've never rented before. And in that case, I make sure that Airbnb requires a government issue ID, which means that that person's trackable. So if something does arise, they're not like some anonymous person. Like they actually have a government issued ID that they have to submit. So those are two things you can do. The other thing is with Instant Book, I actually turned that on maybe like a year into my Airbnb experience, just until I felt comfortable seeing what kind of like clientele I had, just to, like what were the people that were coming, because I really had no idea. And again, I just found that I had a lot of couples, I had a lot of family traveling with each other, and I rarely had like a single male creepster come to my house. And I can tell that story in a little bit. The other thing is, when you don't have Instant Book on, you can review things ahead of time. And there was really only one time that I actually didn't accept someone's request. And it was like an older gentleman, and I felt like his profile pictures were weird, and he like didn't have any information about him, and he didn't say... Like, I remember he, like, said something weird when he booked with me, and I just was like, oh, sorry, it's not available anymore, and I just didn't book him. So it's like there's no harm, no foul. Like, you have that power. That's what that's there for. And I would say, like, trust your gut. Like, often, I'm sure, Ryan, you can attest to this. Like, often if someone's communication is weird from the get-go, it doesn't get better. Like,
right.
They don't suddenly become communicative.
Right.
And so if it's like you feel like someone's being squirrely or you feel like something is weird, just say no. Like, that's fine. That's totally in your right. And I would say my number one principle is do not accept reservations from people who say they're making a reservation for someone else. My one weird story was that I got a message from someone who was someone's like personal assistant, and they were like, oh, my boss is coming to stay there for a week. It was like overseas too. And it was like, my boss is coming to stay and I'm booking him on my account. And I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, he has to have his own account. Because for me, it's like that person literally needs to be accountable. So if they break something, if they do something, if they claim something, you know, I need their account connected to their government issued ID, not some like random personal assistant. Because then you can't hold them accountable. And so I said, if he wants to book with me, he's got to have his own account. So she actually set up an account for him. And he was just like kind of like a weirdo businessman traveling by himself. And he kept very strange hours. Like, he was basically out all night. And I was just like, not my problem, not my deal, you know? And that was like literally the only time I was just like, that's kind of weird, but he kept to himself. So it wasn't like he literally didn't ask anything of me. And this was the other thing, is he didn't communicate to me when he was arriving, which is like being an Airbnb guest 101. Like, when you're literally coming to my house, like, when are you arriving? You know? So that of all the years, that was the one person I was like, hello, you know? So that's where it gets tricky, when people think that they're gonna like manage the Airbnb account like for someone else. It's like, don't do it. Don't ever say yes to those.
So another thing with us, where you were like, you know, you turned off Instant Book for a really long time. For us, it's kind of a similar thing. I think we had Instant Book on for, I think we eventually put Instant Book on, but at first we didn't. I mean, in the very beginning, we were just like, people are going to come and they're going to burn our house down. Like, we were like, whatever. Like, we just thought people were going to like take knives and stab our leather couches. Like, you know, you hear those stories on, on the media, like in the news, and you're just like, that's going to happen. And we actually met people. Every single person that we only had one house. Every single person that rented for, I think it was honestly the first year, we would clean our own house and we would wait for them to arrive. I mean, I think about it now and I'm like, that is because we have electronic locks. We do not have to wait for them to arrive. We would wait for them. We would clean the house. We would change our clothes because we were like all sweaty in t-shirts and stuff. We would put on nice clothes and meet people because we were like, we want them to know this is our house. Like, we clean the house. We see it when you leave. We, live down the street, So it's
adorable.
Yeah, it's a similar thing though, where you're like protective of your space because you either own it or you rent it. Like, this is your space, and you want to convey to people like, you need to take care of my space and you need to be respectful. And so it's a similar thing where and now like I would talk to other, vacation rental people, and they, people who've been around for like 20, 30 years, and they're like, oh, we just leave the keys out for people. Like before there were electronic locks, they'd be like, number one, they'd leave the door unlocked and leave the keys on the kitchen table. They're like, yeah, we would never meet anyone. And we thought that was so weird. And now we're like, oh yeah, we barely have to meet anyone. We're like, do it, go for it. No big deal. It's fine,
But it's so interesting because, I've had it go both ways where like, someone's disappointed that I'm not at the apartment all the time. I've had people be like, oh, because sometimes I'm not even there when they arrive. Like, I also do like a let yourself in system. And I actually prefer that now because it's nice to just have people show up. But also, my house can be a little complicated when you first arrive, like how to like do the, house fan and, just like all these weird little details that it's kind of nice to have someone show you them. But then I've also had people be like, oh, you're going to be here for the whole weekend. I'm like, read my listing, so It's just interesting having people in your space. It's like their expectations are often all over the map. And so right. I always say, if you're hosting people in your space, just be really clear and communicative and set the expectations early. Like, if somebody's coming to my house and I'm not going to be there for the weekend, I wouldn't like spring that on them the moment that they were arriving. I would tell them like a week before, like, hey, I'm not going to be there during your arrival, but this is how you get in. People like to know way ahead of time what the situation is so they can like plan in their heads.
Yeah.
And you probably don't have to do that as much for people who are staying in your house because you're clearly not going to be there. But, for me, it's like I have to let them know, like, oh, I'm here all weekend, or I'm working away, or I'm not here at all, so they can sort of gauge what kind of weekend they're going to have or what they need to ask up front.
Right. Well, it's funny because we had that whole episode of setting expectations, but this theme of setting expectations and communicating is like, we're going to talk about it all the time because that is constantly what you're doing all the time. Like today, I was just telling you a moment ago, like the internet went out at one of our houses and we just had to be like, we have to set the expectation, and we often do, where we're like, we're in a rural area. If there's a storm or if someone hits one of the poles, like stuff goes out. Like this is not this. I mean, stuff goes out in the city too, but like that is you have to expect that you might have to go into town and use the internet, or you might not have streaming. You might have to like play a board game. Like there are things that you just have to set up, and that includes like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to meet you. I'm not going to. I don't live here. Like, people often are like, do you guys live in this house? And we're like, no, we don't live here. Because they're like, where's all your stuff?
Right. Well, and it's funny because I'm the opposite. Sometimes people are like, oh, you live here? Like
it's so weird.
They clearly didn't read the listing that it's like a private room in a shared apartment, And I'm like, read the listing.
Yeah. You're like saying that to me because I never read the listing. I'm like, ooh, pretty exactly. Pictures.
I'm like, read the flippin' listing.
Yeah. But so it's interesting because like, so how do you set up expectations in your listing? Like you were saying before, you say DIY, or you like you don't show your bedroom. Like you just show their bedroom.
Well, I mean, I feel like the more redundant you can be, like, here's a good example. And actually, you and Jay gave me this advice kind of like in the middle of my Airbnb experience, which was I used to just cram people into my house. So I have a 2-bedroom and I have in my guest room that people rent, there's a queen. So 2 people can sleep in there. I also have this little like fold out. It's literally an ottoman that folds into a bed.
It's like a twin size. It's like
it's in the hallway. Bed. Yeah, it's in the hallway outside of the guest room. So it's great for like a little kid or a teenager, like someone who kind of doesn't care where they're sleeping. But it's like close to the guest room. It's almost part of this little suite, And then I can also put a queen air mattress in my living room. And so I can sleep up to for 5 people if I wanted to, or 6 people even if there are 2 people on the queen air. And for a while I was just like, listen, if there's a group of ragtag people who are willing to like go cheap and like kind of like rough it in my apartment, like no big deal. And for a while that was like really lucrative for me, and what the people I was attracting were people who are kind of willing to rough it. And sometimes that went really well, and it was just like a group of girlfriends who like all wanted to come to Boston for the weekend. And sometimes it went really badly. It was like my one kind of nightmare experience was these older women. They were like baby boomers, and they didn't read my listing thoroughly, and they just literally saw on my like what kind of bed types I offered. So it says like 2 queen beds, even though one's an air mattress, and it says 1 twin bed, and it was like, and they just saw 2-bedroom apartment and all of my beds. And so that was what they saw. So when they arrived, they were just like completely confused about the whole situation. And so now what I do, you and Jay, rightly so, we're like, listen, like, is it really worth your time, energy, and other people kind of cramming into your apartment? Just rent the guest room. Like, don't go crazy, because then the kind of people I was getting was just couples and family members, and it was no longer like these big groups of people who are trying to like go as cheap as they can. So, and for me, it saved my like energy and my stress level. Like suddenly I was just dealing with like couples who were super pleasant and not stressed out and not trying to like all use the bathroom at once, you know, because I have one bathroom, you know. So again, it was like people who are willing to rough it, although are often very sweet and very flexible, are also usually not that organized, to be honest. Like, groups of friends are not necessarily the people you want to stay in your 2-bedroom apartment, because they'll just take the whole thing over, or they feel really bad that they're taking up so much space, and then they're never really comfortable, you know, so.
Well, it's funny because I'm the opposite. I mean, we strive for to be able to sleep 6 adults. So, it's funny because I know we're really talking about expectations about beds, but like, you know, one of our houses, it has a king bed, it has a queen bed, and then it has bunk beds in not a private room. It's in a nook, and I actually think this was your idea. When you saw our house, you were like, you could have something over in that area, because it's big enough for like, we call them adult bunk beds because they're not like IKEA bunk beds that you just like shove in a corner. We like built them into the wall with like fancy like barnwood and stuff, but it has a big privacy curtain. So like if you want to change, or like you're like, okay, we're going to sleep and we're going to shut this off and we're going to be in our little nooks. But we have to set that expectation. I mean, we take pictures. I think I put 2 or 3 pictures of the bunk beds, and I'm like, there are bunk beds. They are in a nook. Like, they are not in a bedroom. And we just spell it out in our listing, too. And we've never had a problem. Like, no one's... Actually, people have been like, we love the bunk beds. They're so great, you know? So that's good. But, you know, I have had situations where one time I had 2 couples... And I think one of the couples paid for the getaway and the other one didn't. And they were like tagging along. But the couple that paid for it felt bad that the other couple had to sleep in a smaller room with like a queen bed. So they were like, no, you take the bed. And the guy was actually like kind of pissed. Like he wrote it in his review where he's like, there's not enough space and the beds aren't big enough. And I'm like, I think this is what the situation was. I think that they let the, you know, like other couples sleep in the big bed and they slept in the smaller bed and they weren't happy with that. But it's not like I didn't say that's how the setup was, you know?
Well, and that's the thing, actually. You gave me this advice, and this was part of why I actually decided to not have extra bedding in my offering, because you were like, if you're going to have a bedding option, you should have a picture of it. So it's like, set up the bed in the hallway, set up the bed in the living room. Like, literally people should be able to see every single bedding option. And I've been to so many Airbnbs where they do not show everything, and then it's like, it shouldn't be guesswork for guests. They should just understand. It says in the caption, this is what the couch looks like set up as a guest bed, or whatever your situation is. So I totally agree. But again, I would say, I say in my listing, specify what sleeping arrangement you need in your reservation, because people would show up and go, well, where's the extra bed? And it would be like 2 people. And I'd be like, why would I assume you weren't sleeping in my guest room together? Like, you have to tell me that.
I mean, did you want to talk a little bit about what it's like to have people in your space? Where, like, do you feel cramped or do you feel awkward? Like, someone's in the kitchen and you're like, I'm going to go take a shower, you know?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the reasons why I do Airbnb in the first place is that I like hosting people. You know, I enjoy having people in my space. I love telling people about my neighborhood. You know, I like directing people to like local dive bars, you know. And so I feel like I attract those people. Like, I say in my listing, like, happy to tell you about, like, the secret spots in the neighborhood. And, that's another language thing of, like, I'm like, happy to host you. And then I also say I'm also, like, pretty hands off, So it's like, yeah, I want to chat you up and hear about your travels, but also now I'm going to go into my bedroom and go to sleep. I'm not like, let's go to the bar together, So I try and say, like, I'm happy to host you, and I'm very hands off. So that's some language thing. But also, like, they hopefully understand that there's one bathroom, and there's, I'll say, oh, hey, I'm going to work in the morning. I'm going to use the shower in the morning. Do you have any needs in the morning? Do you need to get in there before me, or is it okay if you get in there after me? Because sometimes, because someone's on vacation, they'll sit in the shower for as long as they want to, not realizing, like, I have to get out the door and go to work, or, I'm doing something in the house. And so I just like to say those things up front, like, oh, hey, I'm going to be cooking dinner with a friend tonight. You guys are welcome to join us. Or, oh, hey, I'm going to go out tonight. I probably won't be home till like 10 or 11. If you need anything, text me. So again, I just like to say things so that they feel like comfortable being in the space. They know when to expect me at the house and when not to, like, I like when they know I'm there or when they know I'm not there. It's kind of a small space, so I feel like people get used to it pretty quick. And their bedroom is all the way in the back, so it's quite private. Like, they actually really have their own private sort of suite in some ways. And I feel like the more comfortable I am, the more comfortable they are. Like, if I'm like, no big deal, whatever, you want some tea? Like, you want to stick your leftovers in the fridge? Like, no problem, So I just try and be really friendly and also really upfront about, like, what does or doesn't fly, Like, I'll just be like, shoes outside, here's the Wi-Fi. Like, I like to keep good boundaries too. Like, I often won't hang out with people at night, I might, like, chat them up a little bit, but I'm not, like, hanging out in the kitchen, or, I don't have a television, so I'm not, like, sitting watching TV, like, I like to give people space too.
Yeah. And, like you said, it's the Airbnb app, and also just texting people is just an easy way to communicate, where you're like, I'll be home at around 10. Just let me know if you need anything. Like, I mean, we even do that. Like, today I was saying, like, the internet went out at one of our houses, and I had to drive over there to see if they had just unplugged something. It was like, but it was perfect, because we were like, just let us know when you're out and about and we'll come over. Basically, like, I don't want to bother you, but if you're fine with that, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're like, I just like to set up the expectation, like, we're coming over, or we'll come over when you go out to lunch, and, like, it's no big deal. And they were great. They were like, they have 2 dogs. They're like, we went out for the day. The dogs are crated. They should be fine. They're not going to bother you, and it's all good. And you're like, great, just so I know what's going on.
Exactly. It's like, I like to people like to know what's happening. And I like to be the same way, So again, I try and be involved and be communicative, but I try to be pretty hands off. And that's worked out really well for me. I feel like people get the vibe, they get the communication. I've rarely had someone overstep those boundaries. It's like they sort of get it right away. And honestly, I feel like when the times that are the most awkward are when there's a language barrier. And usually it's more, people tend to be much more on the shy side with language barrier stuff, like, they don't want to ask me anything, or they don't want to, bother me about anything, and so I tend to be a little bit more like, what do you need? Oh, how's it, how are things? Is everything okay? So I just, I feel like I like to encourage people to not feel so shy in the space, So that is it for the podcast, and we wanted to let everyone know that we are doing a giveaway. We want to choose one lucky podcast listener to give design advice to. So to enter, submit your Airbnb listing to us, and we will do a drawing to choose someone to do a live-ish design advice, so that everyone can benefit from the feedback. And we will record it over video so everyone can see the listing, and we will sort of smudge out the location and listing information. And we will also be ever so kind about what features are great and what could use some work. So if you have an Airbnb listing and you want some design advice, send it to shampooandbooze@gmail.com. And may the odds be ever in your favor. Thanks for listening to Shampoo and Booze at shampooandbooze.com. As usual, send us your questions with an audio file or your written questions to shampooandbooze@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to cover the topics that you care about. And don't forget about our design and listing advice services. Head over to our services page at notperf.com to book your design advice session. Bye.
Bye.